Andrew Potter, thank you for coming to Odense to talk with us about authenticity based on your recent book, The Authenticity Hoax, which I've read with great interest.
Thank you. So the starting point of my investigation is I guess the recognition that the search for the authentic, or the desire for authenticity, has become, in a sense, the dominant moral and spiritual quest of our time. That it seems to have succeeded cool hunting, and seems to have succeeded the desire for status through wealth as something different, as a new evolution in our sense of consumption, experience, and moral attainment. And so you start to notice that terms about this being authentic and that being authentic and authenticity here and there has sort of picked up in the culture. And so the question is, what do we mean when we talk about authenticity? And the sort of starting philosophical question then is, if you're talking about something being authentic, it's as opposed to what? What exactly is it being contrasted with? What is the contrastive force of the term authentic? And so what I do is I sort of unpack, in a sort of Wittgensteinian way, the use of the term, look at the context in which it's being used. And what I sort of observe is that when people talk about the authentic, they're talking about things or products or experiences or so on that are in one form or another in contrast with, or in tension with, or designed at undermining or resisting three aspects of what we call modernity. That is the secularization, that is the draining of spirituality from the world, the disenchantment of the world. The second is the growing power and authority of the liberal state. That's not the liberal in the political or economic, sorry, not in the economic sense or even the social sense, but liberal in the sense of we are all individuals first and foremost. Any community ties, tribal ties, ethnic ties have been drained of importance. We are first and foremost individuals. And the third element is the inexorable march of the market economy into colonizing ever more parts of our lives. So you take those three, you add in the background of it all the steady march of technological growth, and you have a world that is seen as prefabricated, illusory, marketed, programmed, fixed, and alienating. And so what we do is we search for things that are none of these things. We search for experiences that are natural in the sense of nature not having technology, not having humans, not having modernity. We look for things that are ecological, organic. In the political sphere, we look for certain forms of transparency, spontaneity. And you can go on through the various aspects of the culture, art, environmentalism, and so on, and see the various ways in which people are searching for the authentic by resisting or pushing back against these alienating forces of the modern world. So that's the picture of what's going on. And what I end up arguing is that this desire for the authentic, while it's well motivated, while it's motivated by genuine spiritual desires and genuine moral convictions and legitimate moral convictions, that more often than not, it has a number of unpleasant side effects or consequences. One is that it ends up exacerbating some of the very forms of status seeking that we're trying to resist. A second is that it serves, while it seems to be aimed at progressive or left-wing political ends, it ends up serving a fairly reactionary political agenda. And the third is that what we think we want out of authenticity, often when we actually find it in our personal selves, in our personal lives, ends up not being quite what we're actually looking for. That we think we want authenticity until we find it, and then we realize it's not exactly as pleasant as we thought it might be. So you put all these things together, the status seeking, the reactionary political agenda, and the sort of the false promise of authentic living, and you end up with what I call the authenticity hoax, which is that if we're looking for happiness, we're looking for meaning, we're looking for it in the wrong place.
So in a sense, authenticity is no longer what it used to be. I think that when reading through your book, one of the things that strike me is that there seem to be like a two sort of different basic types of search for authenticity. One which is represented globally by what we would call, with a sort of joint term, anti-modern forces, and some of them very unpleasant ones, and some of them that are forces or movements that are searching, that are not anti-modern, but are trying to define what we might call a different kind of modernity. So it's a matter of adjusting certain things and fighting against some of the hoaxes and the phoniness in the marketplace, etc., etc. Would you basically say that we should beware in our thinking of the social movement that sometimes, and more often that we like to think, these two types of adjustments to modernity are more similar than we would like them to be?
That's a good question. I think if I'm guilty of anything in the book, it's of treating it all as part of a continuum. That because you do have people who, on the one hand, are just simply looking for less rationalism, less marketing, less conformity, and then there are people who are looking to, destroy the modern world and destroy the economy and go back to the land, and they would be happy enough to live in a 12th century sort of environment. And I do sort of tend to treat them as a continuum, that the people who are reacting at the one end are actually fueling the extremes on the other. That may be slightly unfair, but at the same time, I do think that while there's a lot that goes on under status seeking that is fairly harmless, or relatively harmless. I mean, it might be status seeking, but in a fairly innocuous way. I do think that what it does is it legitimates a whole way of thinking about the modern project, especially some fairly long-standing things like the notion of progress, the notion of progress through technology, that it ends up casting suspicion on a lot of these things and throwing out the baby with the bathwater, to use a cliche. So I do think that there is a commonality of rhetoric, if not a commonality of desired outcomes. And so to just give one example, there was this, in my previous book with Joe Heath, we picked up on someone took a bunch of quotes from the Unabomber Manifesto and a bunch of quotations from Al Gore's a book about saving the Earth, and sort of said, who said it? The Unabomber or Al Gore? And the rhetoric is exactly the same. Now, did Al Gore think that we should be sending bombs to people and blowing them up? No, but at the same time, he engaged in a mode of discourse that was pretty much indistinguishable from that of the Unabomber. He had sort of bought into that common worldview. And the question is, if you're buying into the worldview, who is actually being true to that worldview, Al Gore or the Unabomber? Probably the Unabomber, just drawing the logical consequences of his morals. So, and I think you can do the same thing with a lot of authenticity seekers. You can sort of you could go through the writings of Osama bin Laden or some serious Qutb, the Islamic fundamentalist, and what he has to say about the West, and look and see what Kale Lassen of Adbusters has to say about the West. And they're pretty much, identical. And I think to the extent that you're engaging in commonalities of rhetoric with madmen, you might want to rethink that.
Example of sort of the similarity of discourse between Al Gore and the Unabomber reminds me of a different domain of authenticity seeking, which I think is prevalent in the contemporary markets, namely the search for an authentic self. And this whole idea that the project of the modern or the postmodern person is to self-actualize almost at any cost. That is that the society is at best a means for you to bring out your real potential for the best possible life and the best possible conditions for your own well-being. In this, we're not talking about material life here. We're talking about the emotional well-being, and you're feeling at ease with yourself and your ability to live out your dreams and realize fully your potential. And in a critical text towards this self-actualization trend, one colleague analyzed the list of symptoms for diagnosed psychopathy. Right. And compared that to sort of the dictums of the self-actualization movement, sort of the disregard for other people's opinions, stay true to your own worldview, and do not abide to other people or other conditions. Believe in yourself first and foremost. Go for realization of your own plans without taking into consideration that there might be other. Yeah. And so there is this paradoxical relationship between the search for freedom from and freedom to on the one hand, and a highly how do you say, dubious social arrangement on the other, right, which I think is built into maybe this whole authenticity hoax.
Yeah, that's a really interesting exercise. I mean, people have sort of picked up on this over the years, the idea that we live in a culture of narcissism, or I like the idea of the culture of psychopathy. I think you could probably go through a lot of self-help literature and find out that it's actually advocating psychopathic behavior. What I find really interesting about that is not that it's there, because it's clearly there. I mean, if you take the dictum "to thine own self be true," literally, but not just literally, but absolutely, of course you're going to end up with psychotic behaviors. That doesn't mean that it's a bad dictum. It just means, like all principles, you shouldn't take them, in an unqualified form, like free speech or anything else. But what I find a bit fascinating is, as you pointed out, that it has become such an overriding moral imperative that a lot of old moral imperatives that until very recently held a lot of sway for a lot of people have simply ceased to have any credibility whatsoever. Just simple notions of honor, simple notions of promise keeping in relationships. The idea that you promise to have and to hold and to love in a marriage until the end. Nobody believes that anymore. People say it, and they say that they believed it at the time, but nobody actually believes it deep down, because everyone will say ultimately, I wasn't happy in the marriage, it didn't fulfill me anymore, or what have you. And there are, you can just sort of go through and list a whole lot of moral codes that had force for a lot of people in our culture until quite recently, and now none of them do, with the exception of authenticity seeking, which says a lot about how far down this culture has gone, that to even talk about honor is foolish. We have one example going on in Canada quite recently. There was a very serious trial of an Afghan immigrant family where the father and the mother had killed their 3 daughters in an honor killing. The daughters were all acting out, dressing Western, starting to date boys. And they killed all 3 daughters, and the trial just happened. And the mother and the father were convicted. It's a very sad trial, very tragic. But what was fascinating about it was that the idea that honor was something that a family was obliged to stand up for, a father was obliged to stand up for, was seen by Canadians as not just, wasn't that his father had taken it too far, it's that the whole idea of honor in your family was preposterous. This is something that, like, how could you, this is something for, a medieval society, not something that a modern society would actually feel, obliged to uphold, which I thought was very, very, very interesting.
That's a very concrete tragedy of the modern sort of versus pre-modern clash of values, and obviously the freedom to self-actualize versus social codes that we, a smaller or larger community, believe that we have to abide. Another tragedy that seems to be built into this authenticity hoax is the tragedy of self-consciousness. In 2 ways. First of all, self-consciousness is a very tough master. I mean, if you have to be self-observing all the time, whether your behavior, your thoughts, are true to either the authentic self that you're trying to produce or reproduce, the authentic culture that you're trying to enact or represent, you become very hung up on correctness in a variety of ways, and that's a very tough kind of living.
Right.
And of course, the second tragedy is that self-consciousness, as you've also pointed out, is the annihilation of authenticity. Right. So you are exactly throwing the baby out with the bathwater by enacting a highly self-conscious authentic self or authentic culture. You are performing a script more than living a particular social, historical, cultural context.
Right. Yeah, and that's, I mean, that idea that the self-conscious of pursuit of something actually annihilates it is something that the Chinese philosophy is well aware of. Anyone who's read any sort of Buddhism or even Taoism knows that the very act of wanting something destroys the possibility of achieving it, right, especially unhappiness. I have this sort of half-baked theory that a lot of the nostalgia that or the authenticity seeking that manifests itself as nostalgia is a consequence of two things. One is the way as we progress from childhood to adolescence to young adulthood as we get older, we become increasingly self-aware and self-conscious about just what is going on, and our language reflects that. And so when we're nostalgic for our childhood, we're nostalgic for what we call innocence, which is simply a lack of self-awareness, that sort of mindfulness that children are in. And then we project that into the childhood of our own society, and we think our own society was once, less self-conscious than it is now. So we think that the innocence we had as children must be reflected as the innocence of our own culture. And so you end up with this sort of double play of nostalgia for our own childhood and also the childhood of our own society, and assume that that's why things were better, because we didn't have this self-destructive self-consciousness. Like I said, it's a half-baked theory, but I think there's probably something to it.
I think that at least it's very interesting to look at something that I've been working on myself also together with colleagues, the consequences of reflexive culture, and how these closed circuits of cultural self-consciousness transform culture. At least in scientific studies of behavior and of how can it be that we react in certain manners, and that we sometimes do not obey particular laws that are established in one cultural context, and then we take these laws to other cultural contexts, and all of a sudden it seems that culture works very differently. So culture used to be this sort of independent variable that explains variations in behavior, but with the degree of reflexivity, it goes from being a background variable to be that thing which we have to explain. That is, it's the outcome of what we do. Of course, culture was always the outcome of our behavior. Right. It was just not based on this self-consciousness and this reflexivity. Right. So it alters fundamentally how we should conceive of the notion of culture and its role in terms of how it relates to social behavior.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm not sure if this is sort of what you're getting at, but I mean, cultural play now revolves around two extremes. One is the extreme of nostalgia, and the other is the extreme of irony. And that's basically all we do now, is engage with one of these two elements, and often at the very same time. Someone sent me, after our talk yesterday, someone sent me a link from the new edition of Fast Company magazine. And it's an argument that the latest trend in marketing is the faux authentic. That a whole bunch of American companies have now discovered that they've been trying to sell authenticity, but everyone's always on the lookout for authenticity and being sold the fake version of it. So now they're just simply marketing fake authenticity. And they're being very upfront about it, right, in this very ironic way. So you've got, in these same images, you've got these images of extreme nostalgia combined with a wink, wink, wink of irony with it all. Which is kind of preposterous in a certain sense. I mean, it's
or it's liberating.
Or it's liberating, right?
I don't know.
No commitments, right? There's nothing you can be committed to without winking at it.
Yeah, well, politically speaking, it's probably more preposterous in terms of sort of cultural plethora. We can take it more lightly. I think that points to a particular set of paradoxes that are built into this, the way authenticity develops. And so one of the One of the things that puzzled me in reading your book was, okay, the conspicuous authenticity has replaced the conspicuous cool as the predominant status field, the way in which we seek and establish status positions. The reason for this development, you argue, has been the proliferation of social media that has taken, the monopoly of cultural hotbeds to some degree out of New York, out of London, out of other sort of cultural hotbeds of cool creation in the world, and spread it out to youngsters and kitten hipsters everywhere. Which can then use social media to establish these new creations. So with this fragmentation and this decentralization, how come that we end up in a situation where we still sort of flock around one particular type of status in contemporary society, namely not cool but authenticity?
Right. That's a really good observation. And my sense is, and I sort of realized this when I started traveling a few years ago, partly to support the book, but also when I was just sort of moving around a lot when I was still an academic. You find that the subcultures or the hipster environments in most places in North America, certainly where I've been, Chicago, New York, San Francisco, Montreal, and Toronto, are all exactly the same. It's essentially a franchising of hipsterdom that has happened, and you've hit the nail on the head. It's a paradox, right? Which is, in this age of increasing fragmentation, what you have is actually a homogenization of what it means to be an authenticity seeker. I think it's precisely because social media has created a common cultural space for all of this, whereas once upon a time, the subculture, the counterculture that evolved in San Francisco could be radically different from the one that was evolving in say, London or Berlin, precisely because they were like Darwin's finches, right? They were off evolving independently of one another completely, without any sort of reference to the pressures in a different part of the world. What you have now is a common evolutionary pressure that's coming through social media. And because all status seeking requires recognition of the other, to recognize you, that you can't have status if nobody recognizes you as having that status. Then what you have is this desire for recognition from a global audience, effectively. And so what you have is, like you said, this strange paradox, which is individualized authenticity seeking, which takes a common form around the entire planet, which is kind of neat.
Andrew Potter, thank you.
Thank you.